and you have to withdraw the funds by the time you're 30. So it's a very good vehicle for pursuing funding for your education. And our stance is that the current tax code places a significant financial burden on graduate students. I mean, if you look at the fellowship package that are given, taxes are not really accounted for in those amounts. So taxes on scholarships and fellowships do really impact the graduate student. Most graduate students are operating in the red, and the amount of tax that gets taken out for federal and state, if you get state taxes, it accounts for about a stipend, 1 month's worth of stipend. So having that extra money is important to graduate students, and that could be, you know, a decision between a person pursuing graduate school and not pursuing graduate school. Because if they, especially if they have to service undergraduate debt that they don't have subsidized loans for while they're in graduate school, instead of like having that principal build up, you know, that's a big decision to make. So graduate school is not exactly an easy thing financially with someone. And one of the other bills we're talking about is employee education assistance. I assume a lot of people here are in school full time, but for all the graduate students that are pursuing education that's supported by an employer, this is pretty big. And it allows for an employer to contribute up to $5,200 about in tuition and books a year towards classes that their employee wants to take if they sponsor a program like this. And then that student wouldn't have to pay taxes on the amount that was given to them. Otherwise, if this was taken away, you would have to pay taxes on the amount. It would just be basically like a part of your paycheck. And so this is an incentive for people to pursue graduate, you know, master's degree, or maybe you're getting a professional degree, an MBA, while you're working. So we would definitely want to support the graduate students who are in that situation. So the two bills that are in the House that are related to the tax incentives are HR 5078, HR 5600. They're both introduced this last year. 5078 was introduced on the 20th of April, and 5600 in June, the 24th. You guys do have printouts of like the basic bill information for each of these bills, and I'll give you co-sponsors, introduction dates, and also a CRS summary, a Congressional Research Service summary of each of the bills. So that's kind of like a cheat sheet that you guys can use if you're in a meeting, and if the person asks, you know, who sponsored 5078, you know, like Higgins, he's from New York, instead of kind of following around, or 5600 Pomeroy. And that'll allow you to be able to say, you know, how many co-sponsors this has and everything else. So, general overview of the information on the bill. 5078 has 3 different parts. The first, eliminating the tax, or the dollar limitation on tax deduction for interest on educational loans, and also expanding the eligibility for the interest deduction. So that includes expanding like the maximum income you can make before it starts being phased out. And that dollar amount that you can deduct from your taxes is currently limited, I think, to around like $2,500. And so repealing the limitation would really help out graduate students who are already dealing with excessive undergraduate student loans and paying those off in graduate school or afterwards, and also professional degree students. Professional degree students, you're probably averaging over $100,000 in debt if you're pursuing like a 4-year degree, like a medical degree, maybe even a JD. And servicing that debt is incredibly difficult for some people, especially getting out. And you know, if you're pursuing a public service job where you're not making as much with these professional degrees, it becomes, you know, almost unmanageable in some cases, where you know you're really pushing people away from this nonprofit sector or public service opportunities that we could really use these professional degree recipients in. The other thing 5078 does, increases Coverdell Education Savings Account, like I talked about before. A Coverdell is like kind of like a Roth IRA for education. You can contribute to it for someone who's under 18 until they're 18. Currently $2,000 a year. It was increased from a lower amount, I think $1,000 or $500 recently, and this bill would increase it to $5,000. And so basically that's after-tax money. You put it in, and then you can take it out and use it for educational expenses, K through 12, all the way through graduate school until you're 30, and all the income you get basically from that amount. So that would be in bonds or mutual funds or stocks. All the gains you would get are not taxed, as long as they're used for educational expenses. So I look at it as like a Roth. It used to be actually called educational IRA. And so that's a very important investment vehicle for kind of like the middle class for pursuing funding for education. And then the last one, which is a kind of portion of what NAGPS has been fighting for since 1986, is including higher education expenses, qualified higher education expenses, as those defined by the Higher Education Act, as amounts accruable from gross income. So basically, this part, what it does is it takes room and board expenses for graduate students and it makes them tax deductible. So currently, if you guys are paying your taxes on a fellowship or a scholarship, you can only deduct the amount you pay for tuition and required fees and books. You can't deduct it for computers or anything like that, or equipment for your lab or something like that. But this would allow you to deduct your room and board. So your Office of Graduate Studies or something like that, they have a number basically for your area that is like the average room and board for living on campus or living off campus. And you would be able to deduct that amount from your gross income. And in most cases, this will actually reduce the tax liability of graduate students to almost zero. So if you say like a normal graduate student earns, like at the University of California, like $20,000 in a stipend, $10,000 is the projected allotment for room and board for UCSD. That would reduce your tax liability to $10,000, and then you take off regular deductions, you basically have no tax. However, the bad part about this only applies to scholarships and fellowships. So depending upon how your institution designates research assistants or teaching assistants as actual employees or non-employees, they will be able to use this deduction. So for instance, at the University of California, RAs and TAs are actually like paid workers. And so they're part of the union. You know, there's like a projected hours that they are supposed to work, and it's very structured. Other universities are not the same, so this would apply. So if you're in the meetings talking about this, you might want to mention that I have language that would include RAs and TAs in this bill. It's just a little statement that would be included. And it's on the NAGPS website. There's a link to it on the leave behind that you guys will give to the legislators. And I would like that to be included in the final bill, if it could get modified in the committee, or maybe even on the floor. But as it stands, it would still be a big win, actually, for NAGPS to get 5078 passed. And one of the biggest things we have going for with 5078 and the other tax incentive bills is there's a lot of provisions expiring at the end of the year, like the employee education assistance that HR 5600 covers. And so like Coverdell would decrease to that previous amount at the end of the year. And I believe there's some other stuff with the tax deduction for interest on educational loans as well. So making the case for, you know, how relevant this is at this current time, just like everybody makes the case for the Bush tax credits that they have in the past couple months. The same thing, we can talk about the same thing for higher education incentives. So the other bill is 5600. It's really easy to read. It's the easiest out of all the bills that we have up, and that just restores the section 127 dealing with the employee educational assistance, making it permanent so that it doesn't have a sunset clause like it's had before. So the other tax incentive bill that's in the Senate, which I'm still not quite sure why there aren't any co-sponsors on this, because Grassley is actually one of the heads of the Finance Committee. But that's kind of, it seems like that's kind of the MO in the Senate, is to not really co-sponsor a lot of stuff. The Senate acts really slow. So it would be tough to get someone to co-sponsor this legislation, but this bill encompasses some of the stuff that's in the two House bills. That includes employer-provided educational assistance, and it also does a lot of other things by changing educational individual retirement accounts, also student loans, and tax deductions as well. The same provision that's in 5078 is in this as well, for higher education expenses. So there's a lot of good stuff in this bill, and we definitely want people to support it, but